Welcome back. At the end of the last episode, Give or Take a Hunting Trip, we left off with me creating an item called a prospecting pick out of some of my oh-so-dearly sought-after copper. Despite the name, this isn't really much of a pick, or at least it's not a very good one. Instead, it's functionally a very, very weird kind of ore dowsing rod with some deeply annoying mechanics that I will explain more in a bit. The goal for today, in addition to the usual goals of not dying in too humiliating of a way, and frantically push my mousepad merch linked in the description in a subtle and non-disruptive fashion by sneaking it into the video, is to get our next material upgrade: bronze. There are actually 3 different types of bronze, depending on what we alloy our copper with, but any of them will do for now. The first bog-standard kind of bronze needs tin, obviously, but there are also 2 others that I can make that will use zinc and bismuth or gold and silver as replacements. My job is to find all the raw ore I will need to make at least one of those combinations, and, in an ideal world, a bunch of other useful materials along the way. The problem with this is that, unlike surface deposits, most of these ores are all buried deep underground with no visible indicators of their location whatsoever, and that's where the prospecting pick comes in. In essence, it's basically a very terrible handheld way of playing Marco Polo with ore deposits. You break blocks with it in an area, and it outputs relative concentrations of the different kinds of ores and creates a marker on your map with that information on it. You can then do this a whole bunch of times to zero in roughly on where rich deposits of ores can be located, and then you can dig down and start using a different low-range but high-accuracy mode to ping the surrounding rock to see if it contains ores nearby. Naturally, I get a whole 2 pings into this before I am immediately distracted by the eminently murderable wildlife. It's all according to plan, though, as when I'm chasing a pig, I definitely on purpose chase it into a very deep hole in the rock that normies will call a cave, but I would like to think of as lunch hole, and trip face first into a bunch of lead. All according to plan. While I was bopping around huffing lead fumes for fun, I got it into my head that, oh hey, I should explore the deep scary cave a little bit. There was a deer that got trapped in here along with me, and because of how their AI works, it split down to the end of the cave to ends unknown, and it would be nice to pick that up, plus you never know, maybe there will be more lead deposits for me to mine. Almost immediately, I spotted a ruin in the wall of this cave. We'll get to that in a second, but first we have to kill off the frankly absurd number of monsters that have situated themselves between me and my mobile snack cart. The little monkeys are basically harmless, but they do eat spear durability, and every spear I throw at them is one less I have on hand to deal with the bigger threats, like shooting the shooty shooter with spine issues that has been camping in the back since I got here. In this one particular instance, having the low ground is actually the good thing here, because these things have a glaring weakness above and beyond their already fairly poor constitution, and that is that they aim for center of mass. In typical first-person shooter logic fashion, spears are actually thrown from a little bit below the center of your camera, despite their animation looking like they're launched over your right shoulder. Presumably, this is the same spot that the arrows are being shot at, but because my spears move so much slower than the osteoporosis onager's arrows, they drop further as they fly, meaning that if I'm careful, I can peek over the lip of a stone block, lob my spears in a shallow arc, and get free hits on the thing while it tries and fails to return fire along a flatter trajectory. After some more flailing and general impalement of the local primate population, I get my deer and proceed to pincush it until it gives up its lunch money and make my way back to the definitely not a dungeon in the wall. The definitely not a dungeon is, in fact, not a dungeon, and is instead an underground janitor's closet with delusions of grandeur. After rooting around and some general vandalism, I net myself precisely 1 flint from the structure before continuing on with my life. Hopefully these will get more interesting the deeper I go. Of course, even regular surface prospecting isn't without its challenges. I am really looking forward to the day that I get a bow and can just nerd pull up and snipe those little twits. Trying to find bronze alloys ends up being something of a situational presentation on the extremes that luck can reach. On one hand, I find a reasonable-ish candidate for cassiterite, aka tin, ore spawning nearby. On the other hand, the entire area that is a good tin spawning candidate is infested with wolves to a degree that I have never experienced before. It was ridiculous, and I am currently carting home the remains of 7 of them in one trip. On the other hand, I found a good cassiterite candidate, so maybe that's okay. Except on the other hand, it started hailing on my way back home, which is both A, blisteringly loud, and B, physically damages me if I'm walking around in it. Also, it's July. Why is it hailing in July? This is supposed to be the hottest time of the year. Clearly, I have not been burning enough charcoal. Regardless, I have a plausible spot to look for Cassie in, which means it's time to start strip searching it, and that needs ladders. Well, it doesn't need ladders, but it certainly wants ladders, and if I don't have them, I will end up wasting an enormous amount of pickaxe durability, so I need ladders, which need sticks. 3 guesses what I spent the better part of my next day doing. If you guessed domestically and internationally abusing trees to steal their limbs, ding ding ding, you are correct. Your prize is a stick. You may take it and insert it in any location you deem appropriate. That is, of course, assuming that I can do anything up to and including pick up sticks without being interrupted by the stupid flipping wolf population. Like, my brother and dog, I play high-speed first-person shooter games and there is no cooldown on how fast I can throw these spears. Did you really think it was a good idea to mess with me? Oh look, Mark II, Electric Pupperoo, but if it didn't work the first time for your friend, it probably is not going to work the second time for you. Have you considered not? I embark on my first real mining mission at the absolute butt crack of dawn, hoping to maybe beat the wolves out to the cassiterite fields, and immediately start digging straight down. Normally, this would be a bad move, but I figured the chances of hitting a cave are pretty small, so I feel fairly safe and yeah. You know what? Sure, this works. Also, hey, free borax. Once I can get a pick that will mine it, that will no doubt be incredibly useful at some distant point in the future, but not now. So anyway, prospecting. How does it work? Well, this is where the precise mode of the pick comes into play. When you use this mode to break a block, you will get a much more detailed picture of what the ore concentrations are like in, I believe, a 13 block wide cube centered on the block mined. The uses for this mode are then obvious. Follow the ore nodes, and as you get closer to the good stuff, the pick will show higher concentrations. Marco Polo, Bob's your uncle. Almost immediately, I found a bunch of quartz with this, which is great, but isn't something that I can mine, so it's also utterly useless for now. I also pick up a trace of cassiterite at one point, but was not able to narrow down exactly where it was located despite spending a whole while looking for it. At the very least, I do now know the stuff is spawning here, I guess. I bummed around in the cave for a while longer looking for things, but other than some lignite, all I find is things that want to kill me. And also, possibly a new-grown fear of the darkness. Not gonna lie, caves are a whole lot spookier to travel in when you can't see further than 10 blocks in front of your face. Eventually, I encounter a deep drifter, aka spiky monkey, and a keybind incompatibility with my prospecting pick gets me killed because I can't sprint away from it while holding said pick. Whoops. So that was a bust. Time to do it again. My second attempt starts in earnest when I find a Jules Verne-worthy journey to the center of the Earth cave hole that punches straight down into the granite substrata from the surface, which is both kind of cool and incredibly convenient for deep Earth ore prospecting. Rappelling down the side of it, courtesy of my many pocket ladders, quickly lets me determine that yes, there are traces of tin in the area, and a great deal of mining lets me determine that no, they are not substantial enough to be worth mining. I am incredibly stubborn, however, and persist, and for my efforts am rewarded with a whopping 2 low-quality lumps of tin. That was not worth it. For a while, I tried to push down into the cave proper at the base of the mysterious cavern to do some more prospecting, but am constantly rebuffed by the presence of a wide variety of hostile everything that is just kind of vibing down there. It's not even that any individual one monster is difficult to take out, because they aren't, but I have basically no health regeneration to speak of, no armor, and no good ranged or melee options, and also no good way of cheesing most of them, so I'm slowly losing a battle of attrition on all fronts here. Eventually, I just gave up and left. Ladders are a royal pain in the butt to make in large quantities, so I would really like to keep caving if I can, but there has got to be a better way of doing it that doesn't involve running into mysterious holes in the earth butt naked and hoping for the best. So, currently, we suck. How do we fix that? Well, with a lot more work is how, and the first job to getting absolutely jacked is collecting clay. Remember when I said, oh yeah, I'm absolutely going to need more of this? Well, it's time. I need more of it. Quite a lot of that clay then gets immediately repurposed into making more molds. Now that I have copper smelting technology well established, I can make a relatively decent armor set out of copper lamella. The trick is the amount of lamella that I need to do it, which is a lot. Doing the casts one at a time would take forever, so now I don't have to. Of course, the trade-off for that is that I spent a bunch of time harvesting clay, and then a bunch more time chopping grass, and gathering twigs, and digging out flammable poo bricks from the riverbank to smelt all of my fancy new molds for my fancy new upgrades, so whether or not it was actually worth it from a time-saving perspective is something of an open question. So that takes care of the tools I need. Now I just need the materials. Lamella armor needs copper, obviously, in really quite extravagant amounts, but it also needs a significant handful of hides. They don't need to be cured hides, thankfully, because I just don't have the stuff to do that right now, and otherwise, if they did, this whole project would probably take the rest of the video. But they do need to be oiled, rubbed with animal fat, and left to process for a few days, and I need quite a few of them. The cassiterite fields conveniently can supply both of these needs. There are a couple of minor copper deposits I found here and haven't bothered digging up yet, and in the rare moments when they aren't inundated by wolves, they host a wide variety of wildlife that is both delicious and nutritious and possessing of skin. Until I get to them, that is. So while all of my freshly mined copper is heating up, I start work on another project that's going to be a whole lot more relevant here in a bit. Crocs. Lots and lots of Crocs. And no, I'm not talking about the shoes, although that would be really funny. I'm not wholly sure what the winter situation is going to be like out here in Antique Land, but it seems like a pretty safe bet that there isn't going to be a fast food joint opening up around here anytime soon, and the best way I have of storing food right now is putting fresh soup in a crock, sealing it with fat, and then putting those crocks in a jar in a cellar. If you assume that I eat 2 meals a day, which, if anything, is probably a very low estimate, multiplied by 27 days of winter plus another 20 or so for berries to start growing, then you're looking at easily needing 20 plus crocks of high-quality food just to tide me over at the bare minimum when I can't go out and hunt. That number goes up substantially if I can't get meat for all of them, and even more if I try and do anything in the winter other than not freeze to death. In the meantime, I can pour my first round of lamella and get it casting. There's not much to do here. Otherwise, we're just waiting on the metal to heat and then cool, and the hides to finish soaking in their bacon grease bath. Time passes, copper takes a chill pill, and in a little bit, all of the lamella is done, and I can put my shiny new penny armor on and get ready to face the world. The stuff does slow you down a little bit, and increases your food consumption rate passively while you're wearing it, but given the truly obscene amount of vegetables I've been pulling out of my farms lately, that might be a good thing. Regardless, if it keeps me alive, that's really all I care about, because the alternative is not, and dying is also hard on the food reserves. With the rest of the hides, I can also do another fun upgrade, which is to go out and slash up a pond of cattails and use them to improve my storage space. Hide backpacks, collectively, increase my carrying capacity by 4 slots, which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that I could only hold 12 items previously. I probably should have done this a fair bit earlier, but learning curve. While I'm there, I also craft an absolute mountain of an item called horsetail bandages. As the name suggests, they are bandages that let you restore a small amount of health quite quickly, and I'm hoping that they will be enough to out-regenerate the chip damage that comes from existing anywhere underground at any point in time for any duration of time, at least when combined with my armor. If they don't, it's no major loss, really. They kind of seem useful to have lying around regardless. All of that preparation was absolutely vindicated, however, by the amount of butt that I am now able to kick. I'm still using stone spears, which DPS-wise are not terribly fantastic, but even so, my armor is good enough now that I can sustain engagements and take out enemies, which is all I really needed. Now that I can safely retreat and heal up with my mountain of bandages, the assault is more of a matter of time and pressure now than it is who can deal the most damage in one hit. The resident basement dweller posse doesn't take my incursion lying down, however, except for the ones who seem to only be able to crawl, and for the next few minutes all I do is engage in a frantic damage race with the locals to try and make them stop moving before my armor breaks. I do eventually win this engagement, and for my spoils am rewarded with a bunch of random rebar that is sticking out of the floor and has punctured my feet multiple times, some string, and a random item called a temporal gear, which from its description sounds basically like it can be used to reset my spawn point. If this is permanent, this is super convenient because it will save me from having to corpse run all the way back to my house every time, but if it's a one-time use thing, I don't see why this exists. With the cave secured for the moment, I can then do what I actually came here to do, which was look for ore. Oh, ore? Is anybody home? Here, ore. Tasty, tasty ore. Here, boy. Initial results are uninspiring, other than a bunch of quartz, which I really still do not need just yet. So for a while, it's looking like another bust, until I spotted chunks of something in the cave roof above the arena of many angry spiders I had to clear out to get down here in the first place, and yep, that's just tin lying right out there in the open. That was easy. Not. Naturally, I decide I want to grab all of the tin, so hold, please. As if that wasn't enough of the good stuff, I was also able to locate a sphalerite, also known as zinc vein, as well. My inventory is way too full to benefit from it right now, but there is no rule that says I can't mark it and come back for later, so I make a note to do that and carry on my way. Whilst doing my part to assist in good primate management practices, I also find a bunch of saltpeter caked onto the walls that I will appropriate once I'm busy not being mobbed by a swarm of angry chimpanzees with rebar sticking out of them. Now, if I had rebar sticking out of me, I would be pretty miffed as well, but that does not excuse their homicidal rage that they seem to have directed towards me in particular. After all, I wasn't the one that put the rebar in them. All I did was try and put in some new ventilation holes with spears into their everything. But they started it. At the end of it all, I return home with an empty belly, trashed armor, a broken pickaxe, and an inventory full of tin, which by my metric is a stunning success. Now we have to do all of that again, but for copper. Oh yeah, did I remember to say we were out of copper? Yep, all out of copper. The lamella armor and pickaxes used to mine the tin consumed almost all of it, so we have to find more, presumably of a high enough concentration that I'm not stuck wandering around the known world trying to find chunks of it scattered across the dirt every 5 minutes. Conveniently, by sheer dumb luck, I happened to stumble on an area that had very rich copper concentrations entirely by accident a while ago, and the story of how this happened is actually quite funny. I was out hunting on one of my hunting trips while not recording and ended up chasing a goat into a random cave hole nearby. Only in my haste to get the goat, I forgot to check if I had building materials to get out of the cave before jumping down into it. Well, come to find out, no, I did not have building materials, and the only way out was for me to use my prospector's pick to dig a stairway until I could reach some nearby gravel, collapse that into the cave, dig that up, and then pile it up to escape. In the process, of course, I did quite a lot of accidental prospecting, and wouldn't you know it, there's copper in them hills. Or, if the concentrations that I was getting are any indication, them hills is copper. The goat cave ends up being a bust, and all the other caves in the surrounding areas are likewise terrible, so I bite the bullet, punch some trees, and start laddering down to do some bulk shaft inspection. I could probably have rephrased that, but we'll just leave it in. Copper is pretty common, so I feel pretty good about my chances doing this, and sure enough, no prospecting was required at all. I just dug straight into a copper vein. This vein proves to be absolutely massive, and the limiting factor quickly becomes not the amount of copper I mine, but my temporal stability. Temporal stability is always worse underground, and this part of the map in particular is also quite unstable, and those two factors combined means that I only have about 15 or 20 minutes in the cave before I start taking damage and making glitchy trumpet noises and am forced to retreat somewhere a little bit more firmly anchored in this universe. Naturally, I go back for seconds, and by the time that trip is finished, we have collected an absolutely fantastic amount of the good stuff. Tin-bronze alloy in Vintage Story is roughly a 90-10 ratio of copper to tin, which is a little bit weird, but the end result is that despite tin being much rarer, I actually have far more of it than I need, and with my copper requirements sorted for the short term, well, welcome to the Bronze Age, folks. We have good alloys now, relatively speaking. Also, it turns out that the copper anvil I made was entirely useless. I have quite literally done nothing with it. This thing cost me 9 ingots of copper to make, and is the single most expensive contribution to my copper economy thus far, and all I've used it for is to take up space and look pretty. Also, oh look, it's no longer the short term, and that means I need more copper. Woo boy, this tier is gonna get expensive. This time around, at least, I was smart enough to bring some clay along so I could turn all the stones I mined into cobblestone blocks, which lets me haul them back with me much more compactly. I am beginning to regret my choice of using conglomerate for my building now, too, since it looks like andesite is going to be the one that I have way too much of, but I'm sure I can find something worth mining in conglomerate at some point. With all this bronze, I also think it's time to start making myself some better tools. Much like in real life, casting metal only can get you so far, and past a certain point, you need bits of metal in shapes that it just won't flow into if you pour it into something. Enter forging. Rather than letting the metal flow peacefully into the shapes you want, you instead heat it up until it's soft and beat the daylights out of it with a hammer to force it into the shape you want. Mildly more effective, 20 times more violent. I initially misunderstood how this worked and thought the direction you hit the voxels changed the way you formed the material, so I wasted an ingot of bronze here, but the end result is broadly the same. Take your hammer, slam it into a lump of metal, and switch modes to shove metal into the spots it needs to be in order to make the shape of the thing you want. Once everything is shaped out, you can then cut away the excess, and wham bam thank you bronze, we now have tool parts. Once you are done deforming your ingot into an unrecognizable mess, you can then take it and quench it in some conveniently located water. Or, in my case, not so conveniently located water because I forgot to get some for this step and had to run out and dump it in a swamp. Here's hoping all the fish poop doesn't affect the temper. With fancy tools that won't break at the drop of a hat, the sheer amount of stuff that I can now do is honestly a little bit intimidating. With my excess of tool-grade metal, I can now realistically spend that metal making things like saws, which are a requirement for brewing, leatherworking, storage, and carpentry, a variety of different types of stoneworking, and a whole bunch of decorative and functional upgrades that do everything from make better armor and weapons to increase the amount of light a torch can output. I, of course, choose to do none of these things in favor of slamming my head against a brick wall and calling it quarrying. Put it simply, I have so much stuff to do that I really need a house for it now, instead of the hovel of dirt and disappointment that I'm currently living in, and in order to get a house worth living in, I will need some blocks to build it. There is actually something of an art form to efficiently collecting stone in this game. Smooth variants of stone blocks can't be crafted. They have to be extracted from the landscape by quarrying out the blocks touching all 6 of their sides and allowing them to collapse into an item that you can pick up. This means that, for any given area of stone, the maximum amount of smooth stone you can get out of it is going to be a substantially smaller amount, although in practice it's usually a fair bit less than the theoretical maximum of 50%, because you can't mine a block without being able to see it. The best solution I've found for now is to dig 1 block wide strips and then chop them up into pieces in a weird 3D crosshatch, but I'm almost certain that there are better options. First, to get the extreme home make, and it is extreme home make because makeover implies that there is a home in the first place, is the basement, or as the game refers to it, the cellar. Food preservation is kind of a big deal unless you want to be wasting your whole day scrounging around for snacks, and cellars, also known as a big cold pit underground, grant a passive preservation bonus to any food items stored in them while they are sealed and closed. I decided to go with a lovingly constructed and entirely unnecessary smooth stone floor with cobblestone walls here, since the game's aesthetic seems so bent towards medieval manor-style building construction. I could have gone with wood, I guess, but making any part of my house that isn't extraordinarily well fortified and carefully segmented away from any sources of open flame out of flammable material seems unwise, especially for rooms as important as my larder. Speaking of flammable materials, it's time to get wooden furnishing going. And by furnishings, I mostly mean doors and storage. With access to forging and saws come the ability to make a lovely little quantity of life upgrades, all thanks to the power of flat wood. These pieces of sliced log form an exotic material referred to as planks, and they are the key to making basically everything useful later on in the game. My focus for now is on doors, which are necessary to keep the rift terrors out of my living room, and a storage block called a trunk, which is necessary to keep everything else out of my living room. Cellars couldn't have come at a better time either, because my last crop harvest has started to come in, and the amount of vegetables it looks like I'm going to have to store is a lot. I haven't really been keeping track of my farms other than to harvest and replant them every once in a while under the theory that it doesn't cost me anything to overproduce, and, well, if I can get meat for soup, we're going to be sitting real pretty. A properly designed cellar plus earthenware jars drops vegetable rot time down to 20% of its normal value, and winter isn't anywhere close to that long. Unless I decide to start hosting 5-course buffets every morning, food is probably not going to be a concern. In the interests of not living in the new hole any longer than absolutely necessary, I start shifting all my stuff over to the basement of my new house immediately. Sure, the house is kind of lacking the livable part, but by my standards a half-finished broom closet is probably a step up by every metric worth considering. This is a very boring chore that involves a lot of running around like an aimless turkey and is utterly uninteresting to watch until I go into my freshly constructed larder and discover that a monster has taken up residence in it, which, yeah. Now that I think about it, they can just spawn down here, can't they? Probably should light the place up at some point. That's easy enough to do. All I have to do is slap down some animal fat in a bowl and it will create a permanent light source. I don't even have to light it, or provide it with fuel, or worry about it burning down my house or anything. It just sits there and makes free, safe light forever. Man, I love caveman technology. I'm gonna be eating out of only one bowl for a bit until the replacements finish cooking, though, because something tells me that burning animal fat in them kind of ruins them for consuming food out of. But that is a problem I'm okay with if it means keeping the creepy crawlies from setting up residence under my bed. Now that monsters shouldn't actively be spawning in the most important rooms of my house, I take another trip to the quarry, grab a bunch more stone, and spend some time doing an entirely unnecessary refloor of the basement so that it will match the cellars. Mostly. I kinda ran out right as I got to the corner, but we'll just pretend that that's moss or something until I get to it. I gotta say, for a first house in a game made almost entirely out of mining tailings, it actually looks pretty decent down here. Seeing as I can actually store extra things for once, I decide my next task is going to be stocking up on sticks, which is motivated by my desire to create large quantities of casting molds here in the future. I plan on doing a whole bunch of forging in a little bit, and while yes, I could just do multiple rounds, it's easier to queue up a massive smelting operation and assemble half a dozen things all at once than it is to, say, make a pickaxe one at a time. This task is greatly assisted by a brand new pair of big plant scissors. I'm not exactly sure if they harvest all the like blocks in an area or if there's just a weak vein mining effect associated with them, but they have single-handedly made chopping down foliage a tenth as annoying as it used to be. I'm also sad to report that no, pouring buckets of water on your casts does not speed their casting time up. And yes, I tried, because of course I did. In fact, while we're at it, I should also get a bunch more wood as well. I have plans that are gonna need it in a bit, and with my brand spanking new bronze axe, collecting it is as simple as introducing the sharp and pointy end to the base of a whole lot of trees. Of course, I could do this with flint axes too, but the difference being here that now that my axe is shiny, it no longer takes 30 years to chop the tree down. Just 15. It's not that much better. Speaking of shiny new colors, if you couldn't tell by everything taking on lovely hues of red, it's fall, and well, yes, I probably have enough vegetables to last through the winter. It might be nice to not reinvent the plot of The Martian and be unable to eat anything other than dirty starch boogers for an extended period of time. Now, conveniently, I happen to have a metric butt-ton of berries, which is a precise unit of measurement based entirely on how effectively they would clean you out if you ate all of them in real life, but berries have basically zero shelf life on their own, so we need to do something about preserving them. That's where the juicer comes in. This lovely contraption is another one of those things that needed planks and a forged metal rod to construct, but with it comes the power to crush various fruits in bulk and smoosh all of their juices into a container of your choosing, which in my case is a bucket, and then a bunch of barrels, because holy cow, I have a lot of berry juice. Once a barrel is full, I can then enter its user interface to seal it, which will signal to the game that I want it to ferment instead of just store in my cellar and go off. This will put a lid on the barrel, and its contents will be inaccessible for an in-game week before presumably out will come some sort of adult beverage. Now, knowing what I know about cranberries in particular, I seriously question whether A, there is enough sugar in them to ferment them in the first place, and B, whether the resulting witch's brew would even be consumable. But standards are low out here in the wilderness, and no matter how terrible it is, it can't be any worse than eating turnips for 60 straight meals. Now that I'm no longer waiting on my bush collection to fruit, I can also harvest and replant them in my new conveniently located back patio farming plot for future beverage collection and enjoyment. I don't have anywhere near enough of them to make a full plot of each kind yet, so I just kind of cranked them down wherever, but I do eventually want to make a dedicated fruit tree and berry farm plot, and style them up to look like a giant indoor greenhouse. With my vast reserves of fruit no longer rotting on the bushes, I am largely now free to do whatever it is I want before winter hits. I will need to stock up on meat for good preserved meals and firewood, most likely, since there is no reason for there to be a body temperature mechanic unless it's possible to freeze to death, but other than that, my time is now my own, and that means it's time to get my house looking like a place people would want to live in. I don't have glass panes yet, but I have plenty of wooden fencing, and if you squint, it kind of looks like window panes, so I make a bunch of that and start throwing together a design that sort of looks like it would make sense, I guess. I'm not too terribly worried about its first iteration, because there is going to be plenty of time to change it up later. What it does still need, however, is a roof, which means it's once again time to go back to the quarry for me, and seeing as the episode is getting a little bit long in the tooth, time to sign off for you. Mousepad information is in the description if you're interested. Thank you for your time, and as always, I hope you enjoyed.